So let's talk about Uranus ruling Pluto. That's because Pluto is in the sign of Aquarius, and by modern rulership, Uranus rules Aquarius. So we marry essentially Pluto, the archetype of Pluto, with the archetype of Uranus and Aquarius, and that is the fundamental idea of astrology, okay? The fundamental idea of astrology, as I see it, is basically like Mad Libs, or if you've ever taken a class in high school, at least in the United States public high school system, there is a thing called literature and humanities that I'm sure exists elsewhere in the world. And you essentially write compare and contrast essays about different books or different essays that you are reading. And you're meant to compare one theme in this book versus that book and compare and contrast. And essentially, I think that is all we are doing when we do astrology as well, because it's completely dynamic. There's never one truth about anything, which is, for me personally, I think such a big reason why I am very pro choice when it comes to interpretation specifically. Okay, not to go off topic here, because actually astrology itself is an Aquarian theme. Astrology is an Aquarian theme because it is the edge of our known reality. Literally, the edge of our Earth is the stars, right? And that seems to be a horizon out there that we can go into seemingly infinitely, right? So, as a fractal signature, that same idea, anything you can could always be approaching the horizon of, whether literally or poetically, that is an Aquarian thing. And so, if you think about someone who is Aquarian by nature, they themselves embody that idea of the horizon that's you can never grasp it. And so they themselves might feel very non-human. I've heard Aquarian friends of mine in the past have said they feel alien. There's something non-earthbound about, pardon me, there's something non-earthbound about Aquarians, and I could say the same thing about Pisces people, but I think Aquarians in particular, and those with strong Aquarian energy, which I would include Saturn in Aquarius as well as Uranus in Aquarius, of course, North Node or South Node in Aquarius. So you don't really have to have the personal planets. If you have really any planet in Aquarius, including the outer planets, you have a strong Aquarian energy. Me, for example, I have a Uranus in Aquarius. That's all I have in Aquarius, but it's making a strong aspect to my moon. And it's a square, strong square to my moon. And so while on the surface, I never saw myself as Aquarian or distant or alien, I don't feel alien in this world, honestly. I can very much so understand my brain as an Aquarian signature, especially in contrast to other people's brains, how other people work. And that circles me back to this idea of the compare and contrast essay, or this idea of Mad Libs. That's truly all astrology is. That's truly all I think that Aquarius is doing as well, is um, trying to find something new and innovative that breaks the structure that came before it. Because Aquarius is always what comes after Capricorn. Aquarius is always the intelligence that is able to find its way into someone's mind because they have a skeleton. Okay, Capricorn being the skeleton. And then we have a brain which can receive more information, which can receive what in linear time seems like the next new technology, but from the perspective of no time, from the perspective of a singularity point of everything existing all at once, which is an Aquarian perspective. Aquarius is simply how we see new information come into reality in time. Cats. And I always found that very fascinating, right? So, and then of course Pisces is where after we can see the timelessness working, Pisces is where it we have the actual experience of the unified field that the Aquarian helps us recognize that not everything can be in structure and in order in the way that Saturn and Capricorn want it to be. Okay, so the relevance of all of this in that right now the Pluto is in Aquarius. Pluto is the most important planet in the astrology that I study because and that I practice because it's the deepest motivation. It's the ground zero essentially. It's the baseline. There's no more digging below Pluto. You could wax poetically about a Pluto thing, but that's going to be always the reference point. And if you continue to do too much Pluto digging, that's where I think you can have the experience of just like talking over the same trauma story over and over again and not really actually not actually feeling like you can go past it or heal it, because you actually need to change with Pluto. Pluto wants you to go through the fire and come back a different person. It's an initiation. It is a death, literally and metaphorically, again, poetically and literally. So the fact that Pluto, which is this deepest motivation, um, right now, collectively, we're all experiencing it in Aquarius, which is that edge of the horizon. It's the death of the edge of the horizon, okay? Which is the death of all Aquarian archetypes, which includes astrology. It's the death of the mind of God, which is a famous way that it's put in EA. Aquarius is the mind of God. If Pisces is, again, the unified field of God, then Aquarius is the mind of God. Pluto going through Aquarius means these 20 years we're experiencing the death of the mind of God, which doesn't mean chapter end, full stop. It means going through the fire, transforming, and coming out anew. We are still within the first 10 degrees of this transit, which means it's still very brand new. We haven't really even died yet, I don't think. I think we are coming into this recognition of how we have even reached the edge of the edge. Okay. And that is interesting to consider because right now we have Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, is about to shift signs into a new sign, into a fellow air sign, into Gemini, thereby imminently making a trine to Pluto, which all that means is there's a lot of harmony between what Uranus is doing and what Pluto is doing. And given that Uranus is the ruler of Pluto, what that means is we are moving into a state of really profound harmony with understanding what does it mean to be at the edge of something, communicating the fact that we are at the edge of something dying, and recognizing that even we need to have new communication styles to even be able to articulate the fact that we are at the edge of something that is dying because we don't even know what the other side is right now. That language doesn't really exist, I think, until these trines and this great sextile that's about to happen, until that really kicks off in the next few months. Okay? This is what I have been feeling and thinking about. So let me take a moment to see if there's anything else I wanted to say here. Ultimately, the ruler of Pluto, once Uranus moves into Gemini, because Uranus rules Aquarius. And so we have to think about right now the ruler of Gemini when Uranus goes into Gemini, which is Mercury, which is linear thought. Okay. It is rational, step by step, left brain, things that actually work in reality in real time through your capacity to communicate them and explain them in time. Logic systems. Okay. So what does that mean? I think it means that each of us have to, especially those of us, me included, who are coming from a real reliance on this idea that reality doesn't need to make sense, right? The whole woo spiritual world of manifestation, we're told these things aren't supposed to make sense. Just wait, hold on to your idea, your manifestation, just play out, trust yourself, basically. Don't push yourself. All of that's still true, but what I'm trying to get at here is that um, that's not going to cut it anymore. Even though it has worked, it's still true in some paradigm, but that's not the linear reality that we're going to be ordering anymore. With this Gemini function now, the point of Pluto will be to linearly express the death that we are experiencing, even though it will absolutely feel like there are new technologies and new modes of communicating, likely telepathically, likely in ways and speeds with which we use our mind we have never before, collectively and individually. Even so, this is all still going back to a fundamental question of death of these Aquarian topics, death of the way that we know how to use the algorithm of our brain, whether that's the compare and contrast lit essay where we figured out, oh, when I move the words around and I can think poetically about these two different things, um, then I feel my own brain expand. It's actually really fun to write a compare and contrast essay sometimes if you're a nerd. It moves you into a state of poetry because then you can begin to compare and contrast anything in your mind and develop a relationship with something outside of you. Compare yourself, contrast yourself. But fundamentally, Pluto and Aquarius is also saying humanity is dying. And I think that's a literal and a poetic interpretation, which says how we perceive of the meaning of humanity is going through a death and rebirth, which means we're not here just to work anymore. That's fundamentally changing. Humanity is something else, at least in this new era, these next several decades. Oh, here's the final thing I want to say. Uranus spends around 7 years in a sign, but Pluto still has another 19 years to go through the sign of Aquarius, which means this is this is really the first phase. You could call it maybe the second phase, since Uranus was in Taurus for a good first of these few years of Pluto and Aquarius, but Uranus will move into Cancer at some point. After it moves through Gemini over the next 7 years, Uranus will move into Cancer while Pluto is still in Aquarius. There's a cat. That's what I'm looking at. My apologies. Uranus will move into Cancer at the same time as Pluto is still in Aquarius, which means that after we go through this next 7 years of like using the change in technology to understand how much humanity is dying and being reborn, then we are going to be revolutionizing our emotional body to further, what's the word, to further integrate how much death, how much change, how much true metamorphosis has happened on the level of how we define humanity. By the time Uranus enters Cancer, though, we will be very deep into Pluto and Aquarius. It'll be the last 10 degrees or so of Pluto and Aquarius. If I have this right, if I'm totally bonkers, just tell me. But I'm pretty sure this is, and so we're going to be pretty clear on what's going on, and it'll be like writing out the last years of Pluto in Aquarius, okay? And if you consider the last years of Pluto in Capricorn, in the last years of Pluto in Capricorn, we already started major conversations about Pluto in Aquarius, which means by the time Pluto reaches this point at the end of Aquarius, we'll collectively already start talking about Pluto in Pisces. So, moral, I think, of what I want to be putting across here right now is that things are always moving and shifting and changing. And over the next 20 years, there's so much movement in our brains through, of course, Pluto, but I guess I should say over the next 7 years, we're focused on this Pluto Uranus trine, but it's going to be really only, let's say, a half or a third of the larger Pluto and Aquarius game, which, again, in further context, is only just the next 20 years of our lives. And regardless of how old you are, like you can imagine the next 20 years. If you've lived 20 years, now you have, I don't know if I was 20 when I was 20. I don't know if I could imagine what would be in the next 20 years, but you kind of get my gist, right? Like by the time you turn in your mid to late 20s, anything other than that, suddenly 20 years doesn't seem like too far off. You know what I mean? I'm 29 now. 20 years from now, I'll be 50. Pluto will be in Pisces. We'll be talking about that. Okay. And I think we'll all still be here. I don't know. Who knows, right? But this is what I like to keep in mind with astrology, especially astrology of these times, because it can become so overly sensationalized, but truly everything is just a moment. And going back to some things I thought about a lot during the earlier this year of 2026 when we still had that Pisces pile up, the truth of I think living is truly just about holding the capacity for who you know yourself to be right now, holding space for unconditional love of who that is, and like watching what happens when that happens. There really isn't anything you need to do other than fully accept who you are, like right here, right now, and live that so truly in unconditional love. I don't, there's nothing more else to say. I could interpret that in any lineup of planets. That's always going to be the core of what I speak to, which is why I named this channel Brightside Astrology, because it is truly an interpretation. I don't care. Sorry, I don't care if for thousands of years it's been done one way. It's not to diminish the idea of, let's say, indigenous or ancient wisdom. My truth is equal to that truth. The efficacy, or rather, um, there is no greater moral weight behind an older, heavier truth, or let's say what I'm bringing forward. This is going off an idea that's called morphic resonance, which is from a man named Rupert Sheldrake, who basically talks about the fact that there is no actual natural law. There are no irreducible qualities, such as the zodiac, such as this. And so, what we're doing with astrology, interpretation of astrology, is we are going off of centuries of people who decided to start these patterns, human pattern recognition. Rupert Sheldrake's theory that he's tested through a bunch of other things is that nothing is intrinsically morally more right or wrong than something else. None of these systems are. The reason they may seem as though they are like natural law, and that's to say, predictable, contest them, is simply because so many people have been doing it for so long. So the field, the energetic field that we live in, and I'm thinking now about Uranus and Gemini, telepathy, data that's in the air, right? The intelligence of the air that we've all been swimming in since before we were born. Okay? The patterns are there too. The more someone does something and the more people do something, the easier it is for more people to do that thing, whether or not these different people know the same thing is being done. Does that make sense? Which is to say, you have full capacity to create patterns in your life that are your own because there is no fundamental truth except for the baseline at which you are working. You know, this idea that the buck stops here. Like you are the buck that gets to stop. Okay. And again, for me, the most important thing is the buck stopping at unconditional love for yourself. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that other interpretations of astrology are wrong. Whatever works for you to reach unconditional love for yourself, the easiest is great. So if, let's say, my greatest trigger point, if Saturn being in fall in Aries has actually helped you to intellectually and physically and emotionally love yourself more because it gives you some context for why things haven't been working, then great, use that. But what if I told you that this idea that Saturn being in fall is like we're setting ourselves up for disaster every time we are talking about that again in such terminology, because all of these words have these meanings that we're not questioning, even if we know, you talk to an astrologer about it. Oh, I don't, I know it sounds bad, but let me tell you the nuance of what I mean by fall or what it really means. Unless you have the strength of character to rebuild that in every neural whatever is going on in your brain, then do you know how much unconscious energy you're pulling into your interpretation through using that verbiage? I don't know. I feel very strongly about this. I have a Saturn in Aries, and I'm not going to speak so much about my Saturn return probably for another 6 months or even a year from now because I want to, you know, recognize that I'm in the middle of it and things can happen still even after it's been exact. But in any case, I think everything I'm saying I still hold. Um, and this is a larger piece that I think and talk about a lot, which is that astrology itself dying. I will still do it, but part of the way I see the death of this algorithm, this way that the logic of the mind of God has been working, um, has been overdone. Like it's outdone. It's reached a limit. It has exhausted itself. And that's Pluto. Pluto is that point of, okay, well, I exhausted this desire, so what's next? What's the baseline you reach next? And whenever Pluto moves through a sign, you reach that exhaustion point at some point. Okay? So I have chosen with my life to correlate this in the way that I am, which means doesn't mean you have to or you have to agree with me, but I wanted to share this perspective. Um, is there anything else that I wanted to say? Important to also recognize where your Pluto is. My Pluto is at 0 Sag, so I'm getting a sextile from Pluto and Aquarius to my Pluto and Sagittarius, which is a very different vibe from someone who's going through a Pluto square right now. Okay? And just check your chart. See what's going on with transiting Pluto and your Pluto. Because this is going to be the energy that speaks to you on that deepest fundamental level. Often Pluto is so difficult to put your pin down on and describe if you haven't been like weaving this type of patterning into your life already. Um, so that's what I wanted to share. Let me know what you think. Um, enjoy your life and bye for now.